The pain came first, sharp and honest, like something inside me finally remembering how to hurt. It was the kind of pain that makes time move in fractions, 1 minute a second, the next an hour. So I count breaths because counting things keeps the panic from finding a voice. My hand is clamped to the rail of the hospital bed, knuckles white from the effort of not grabbing at anyone, not collapsing into someone's arms that I don't trust anymore. The fluorescent light above the delivery room throws everything in sterile strokes. The white of the sheets, the blue of the scrubs, the impossible calm of the staff who do this every day and rarely notice the volcano a person becomes in labor. Sweat runs down my spine. The smell of disinfectant and cheap coffee mixes with something deeper. Metallic, like ozone. Then I catch a scent that stabs through the fog like a name I don't want to hear. Sandalwood. A familiar, calm sandalwood that has always meant him. I turn because there's no other thing left to do. And there he is, scrubs, mask pulled down for the moment like a fallen shield. Adrian stands at the foot of my bed, hands that have held scalpel and people with perfect steadiness folded in front of him. His eyes, when they meet mine, are frighteningly plain. No drama, no apology, just observation, like he's reading an old file he never closed. He isn't supposed to be here. He left when my belly was still soft, when the first quick kicks felt like a promise between two people. He left like the easy answer to a problem he didn't want, citing long hours and projects, and a life whose most important future seemed to be built on meetings and marble. 7 months of empty texts and missed calls. 7 months of me learning to be pregnant without anyone's hand at the small of my back. "Julian," he says, and his voice is the same as ever. Low, effective, the kind of voice that gives orders and everyone obeys. But the name between his teeth is different now. It's sharp with something I can't name, and I hate that it lands like a bar on my skin. The midwife, Sarah, is near my head, squeezing my knee with a practiced gentleness that says, "Don't be ashamed to scream." Nurses move in choreography. Dr. Eris, the cardiologist I'd never met but whose calm, professional manner has steadied me since the collapse, stands to the side taking notes. Their eyes flick to Adrian and then away, as if his presence is a storm they'd rather not look at directly. "How long were you?" I start. My voice is small, barely a thread of sound. The next contraction takes it from me. Adrian kneels, suddenly close, and for a fraction of a second I see only how his hands feel when they touch a wound. Competent, careful, cold. He doesn't touch me without asking. He doesn't touch me at all, actually. Just places his gloved hands on the sterile tray, anchoring himself. "You can do this," he says, very quietly. Not to me, but to the room, as if reminding us all of the rules. Then he looks at me. The man I loved, and the man who made me leave him in my head over and over. And he says, to me only, "I won't leave this time." I want to laugh. I want to throw something at him. I want to ask how someone shows up at a hospital in the middle of the most intimate moment of my life and thinks 3 words will set things right. My heart hammers against my ribs like an animal trapped, and he's standing there with a leash. The baby's head crowns with a wet, miraculous sound. There's a scream. Mine. Or maybe the room's. And then Sarah lifts our son. A small red person clenched around my finger with a fist that has no room for history. He smells of fluid and warmth and something new that makes the ache in me split. The same raw thing that made me terrified of loving him, because love now means the risk of being abandoned. "Leo," Sarah pronounces, and the name, which I've wanted and feared, becomes a breath between us. He is placed on my chest for skin to skin. His weight is negligible and infinite at the same time. He nestles, and the tiny sound he makes settles something in me I didn't know needed settling. From across the room, Adrian watches as if he has been placed outside the painting we've become. His jaw works. He is shaking with something I can't catalog: regret, guilt, a hunger. He stays when the nurses urge for space. He stays when he should leave. That is the thing that truly breaks me. His staying. Not because I want him to stay. I have for months constructed a life that would not include his return. I have made rationed maps of how to survive alone. But his staying lands on me like responsibility. It means I must feel, on top of everything else, the fact that he chose to be present now, and what that implies about the time he'd been gone. After the ecstasy and the blood and the small universe that is Leo settling into my arms, my body gives way. It is a slow slide, like a tide pulling me under. Pain hushes into something more dangerous. The room narrows to beeps and the scent of him. Adrian, closer now. He has moved to my side and placed a hand on the small of my back. For a moment it is simply pressure, neutral and steady. Then my vision blinks, and the monitors spike. I can't, I murmur, and I don't finish the sentence. I never finished the one where I promised myself I'd survive this without needing him. They wheel me to recovery. The corridor lights blur into a river. Adrian moves ahead of us, his figure a dark shape, and I want to tell him not to go before me because there's an ache in the way something inside me remembers being alone. But then the floor drops out and everything goes white. The diagnosis comes in leaned tones and clinical words that somehow don't fit the rawness beneath them. Dr. Eris leans over my bed later, in a chair that looks too small for the broad shoulders that used to belong to someone on my side before he walked away. He speaks with the kind of caution people use when holding a fragile ornament. Stress-induced cardiomyopathy, he says. It's sometimes called broken heart syndrome in clinical literature. He pauses to find a phrase that won't sound like fiction, and finally settles on. But in our context, with alphas and omegas, there are physiological responses we emphasize that feel very much like the emotional. Like prolonged, unbuffered stress can overpower the heart. He tells me it's partly dramatized for the world I was born into. He uses the term the hospital uses in their briefings when they must explain Omegaverse physiology through a lens that remains clinical. He explains my heart didn't have the social support it needed to buffer itself through the strain of pregnancy and isolation. The monitors still chase the truth in numbers. Elevated enzymes. A heart not cooperating in its rhythm. Adrian overhears all of it. He doesn't argue. He looks at me the way a surgeon looks at tissue. Measured. Assessing for viability. There is sorrow in his face. Something that tastes like apology. I knew, he says finally, voice tightened. Months ago. I saw a file, an entry during an audit. I didn't know how to come back then. I thought I was protecting my future. He stops, breath ragged. I was a coward. I should say that admitting to being a coward is not a cure. I should say that apology is a small thing when stacked against months of emptiness. But at the base of my skull there is a truth that is louder than any moral lecturing. He did not leave me to die deliberately. He left of his own fear and entitlement, and now is here to steady the ship he almost sank. He speaks to the nurses in quick, clipped sentences about discharge and what arrangements can be made. His fingers hover over the chart as if he can rewrite it. Julian needs monitored care, he tells Dr. Eris. I can arrange it at my place, private wing, full staff. He needs stability. My first witty retort dies in my throat. My mind, which has been sharpened by months of being alone, flares into suspicion like a herald. Move in with him? To the house that used to be our argument stage, our battleground? The house that belonged to Adrian's name and his family's expectations? The place where his mother kept a photograph of the family estate like a threat? There are legal considerations, Dr. Eris says. Professional. Careful. Because you are still technically married. Divorce papers never finalized, I say before I can stop myself. The line cuts through the room cold. It is true. He left at the wrong moment, but bureaucracy moves slowly, and I never filed the last signature, because I never finished mourning the version of us that might have been. That omission has teeth now. Adrian's brow tightens. That line gives him leverage he will not explicitly use, not allowed, but he knows the law will side with him if he chooses to push. I won't force you, Adrian says, and the contradiction is a visible struggle. His need to control and his need to make amends bending against each other. I'll do this as a caretaker, as... He looks at Leo sleeping, small and perfect on the little hospital blanket. I will do this for him. Leo's weight against my chest is a small constant that keeps me from giving the sarcastic answer I want to spit across the room. My sense of protectiveness kicks in fierce and immediate. Babies don't negotiate parentage in the moral sense. They require care. His breath, wet and warm against my collarbone, is a tether. The thing I will not betray is him. I agree. Because the choice in the moment is microscopic and clear. Forgoing an offer from the man who hurt me could mean more risk to Leo and to whatever thin thread of health I have left. I agree because my son needs warmth, and the hospital has made clear that recovery here will be improved by sustained proximity and reduced stress. Things a proper caregiving environment might provide. I agree because I want to be alive to raise him, and not all living things require that the path to survival be fair. Adrian moves fast then, with the crisp administrative competence I've always hated and needed. Nurses file paperwork. Sarah holds Leo while they transfer me. Adrian's hand is clasped over mine in the vehicle. Steady, a discreet anchor. He drives like a man who has banked his life on being the best at crossing thresholds. Between wards, between operating theaters, between boardrooms, and now between the life he'd chosen and the life he left behind. The Ashford house is a cathedral of quiet. Marble floors swallow the sound of our shoes. Portraits of ancestors look down, their faces crafted in oil like verdicts. The staff move with the confidence of people who have always been certain that control and status can rearrange any problem. Mrs. Gable, the house's long-serving nanny and beta caretaker, meets us in the entry hall like a warm, efficient hearth. Her expression is careful, layered with loyalty to the family and a protective weariness that has seen far worse than two broken lovers. They take us to a guest suite converted into something between a recovery room and a nursery. Monitors are set up around the small bed where I will sleep. A bassinet sits close to mine for when, in the middle of the night, life needs feeding. There are soft, unassuming touches meant to soothe. Lavender sachets labeled "No Strong Scents." A small stack of newborn clothes folded neatly like an apology. Adrian instructs the staff with minute detail. Staffing patterns, medication charts, a rotating schedule of nurses. He plans as if the world can be arranged into tidy boxes where every variable must be accounted for. When it's quiet, he sits at the foot of my bed before the staff have left. He looks tired in a way that doesn't erase his always immaculate posture. He smells of sandalwood and rain, a combination that used to feel like home and now feels like an accusation. For a moment I consider simply leaving, to take Leo and go to a shelter or to a friend's house in a neighborhood whose streets I can memorize. But where would I go when my heart skips and the world blackens at the edges? Which room would have the monitors and the nurses and the skill to catch me? "I won't interfere with your decisions," he says, the words measured as if he has written them on a contract. "But I will not walk away from him, from you, not like before." "That's convenient," I say. I don't shout because my jaw still aches from the labor and my chest tightens like an old vice. "You made that choice when you left. I rebuilt without you." He closes his hand around the edge of the bed as if feeling the pulse beneath the sheet. "I know. And I will not expect forgiveness as payment for presence. I will earn it. If you tell me my presence is unbearable, I will leave. But for his safety, for your recovery, I will arrange as much care as I can afford." There's a fine line between money and care in his world. He offers both. Sometimes both are dangerous. But as my heartbeat stutters and steadies under hospital measurement, as Leo's breaths warm the underside of my chin, the reality is simple. We are a small family now by blood and by accident, and each of us is necessary for the other's survival. The first week in the mansion is a protocol of small things. Nurses come and go. The house runs on a schedule that seems to think parenting is a project plan. Mrs. Gable is at once maternal and exacting. She corrects my swaddling technique with the gentle firmness of someone who knows that a small human's comfort can save sleepless nights. Adrian is in and out like a surgeon between scrubs and suits. He brings me food he tastes first, and describes it like a market analyst. And he checks the monitors like a man doing rounds, eyes flicking to numbers like a hawk to prey. I resent him openly at first. Sarcasm becomes a reflex. I refuse small kindnesses, an extra blanket, a cup of tea, because to accept them is to let him redo the narrative. I keep a notebook where I file evidence of the months he was absent. The list grows. Missed birthdays, unanswered texts, a photograph of an empty apartment, an airline receipt, pieces of a history that justify my distrust. Even so, there are moments when my resentment is stupid against the gravity of the smallness in my arms. Leo learns my scent, which is different from Adrian's. Mine is lemon and night air. Adrian's is sandalwood and heat. Leo makes a face when Adrian holds him the first time. the way a newborn tests the world. But then he settles, and Adrian's hands find the rhythm of touch that is a surgeon's strength and a father's gentleness. My chest burns with emotion that refuses to be named, something between gratitude and the battering of old wounds. The medical plan is not simple. Dr. Heir explains, again, careful, thorough, that my heart needs what the papers call social buffering. Consistent, calm contact, reduced stress, regulated sleep, measured physical closeness. In the Omegaverse frame the hospital uses, physiological responses to scent and touch matter. Pheromone therapy is discussed in clinical terms, regulated exposure, monitored interactions. The language is clinical, but the import is not. My body reacts to proximity and scent, as if it were instinct, not theory. You will have choices, Dr. Heir says. Therapies require consent. Pheromone exposure isn't something imposed, it's a controlled environment. The bind, if you will, comes from repetition and safety. We will proceed with your consent at each step. I like the way he uses the word consent, like a tool, formal and solid. It feels less like a moral essay and more like a foundation stone. It is important that I know I can refuse. It matters more that I understand what I'll gain if I accept. Adrian sits through these consultations. He listens with an intensity that makes the words on the page seem fragile. He asks questions that a man in his position would know to ask, about medications, about risk factors, about lifestyle changes. But then he asks a question that reveals something deeper. If, he starts, voice faltering for the first time like a surgeon who has noticed a stain they can't remove. If it helps him, and helps you, then I will do whatever's required. Day and night. I will be present. Presence is a curious currency. I am both suspicious and aware of how desperately I need it. I am also aware I don't want that presence to be a purchase he makes to smooth his conscience. He must be better than that. He must be someone who acts without strings. For days the routine is tender and terrifying. Nights of feeds, the soft slap of a monitor when my heart decides to seesaw. Adrian on the couch, sleepless beneath the low-staffed windows. Mrs. Gable moving like soft machinery through the nursery. Sarah dropping by with odd practical jokes to lighten the evenings. Somehow, in the smallness of routine, there is a repair that is possible, but not inevitable. One evening, some nights in, when the house seems finally to have learned the rhythm of our breaths, Adrian steps into the guest suite doorway with a small envelope in his hand. His face is an open map, and for once he looks less like a man cloaked in status, and more like someone naked with fear. I can't fix everything, he says, voice like thread. I can't take back the months. I know I can't command forgiveness. But there are things I can do to make sure you know I'm trying. He places the envelope on the bedside table. Inside is a short list. Concrete promises. Transparency of schedule. Mandatory check-ins. Financial arrangements to cover Leo's future. A clause guaranteeing custody decisions would be mutual. There is also a ring folded in tissue paper. Not the heavy imperial signet of legacy that his family might expect, but a simple band. He doesn't press it to my finger. He knows that gesture would be a demand. Do you accept this as a start? He asks. I look at the paper, the ring, and then at Leo curled against my chest, tiny and perfect and oblivious to the history that surrounds him. The paper is a shove against the randomness. It is not love, but it is data. It is a map toward safety. And for the first time in months I feel something like relief wedge into the cracks of my fury. I sign the first promise with a pen that shakes. The act is small and monumental. Acknowledgement that I will let him try. That I will not let him off the hook. That I'm not relinquishing anything essential about me. Consent lays a track beneath us. He reads it like a surgeon places stitches. Careful, respectful when necessary. When the staff leave and the house settles, Adrian asks for a small thing, awkward in its intimacy. Skin to skin, he says. For him, for you, for recovery. I think of what it did in the hospital. How Leo's steady breaths could calm the tremor in my chest. I think of how my heart had spasmed and people had used jargon. Social buffering, regulated exposure, to make a path out of panic. I think of how this man had not been present, and yet now asks for moments that would put him inside my body's most private rhythms. It has to be my choice, I say. I have to be sober when I say yes. You have to be in control, he replies. I promise, no coercion. Only when you say it's your choice. The room holds our measured breathing like a secret. The monitors tick. Leo stirs. In the hush of the guest suite, I let him place my son on Adrian's bare chest. The sandalwood scent wreathes the small baby like a promise. For a minute my chest aches in a way that isn't just physical. My heartbeat slows. Adrian's breathing matches the baby's, tentative, and then certain. I watch them, and the anger that has been a reliable armor against the world starts to feel less like armor and more like a fence that keeps me from something else. A fear of being loved and then left. The night closes in soft and complicated, and I find myself in the liminal space between pain and possibility. I do not forgive him yet. Forgiveness is a length of rope, and I need time to knot it. But I choose, steadfastly and with the small bravery left to me, to stay. My consent is an active thing, a decision I shape, not something I accept to make things easier for anyone else. If he wants to rebuild, he must do it on my terms. Outside, in the house that carries his name in polished plaques, a portrait watches. We are two men in a mansion built by men who never thought they'd see a son like ours. A family that had always prioritized line and estate over the flinching, messy thing of human need. The house has its own breath now, slow as it learns to accommodate a new rhythm. An infant's small storms, monitors that beep like an anxious chorus. The uneven apologies of a man who is learning his remittance. The next morning there are messages on the bedside table, a letter from a solicitor attached to a familiar logo. Little cursive letters that I remember as Adrian's family's office. An indication that the question of heir and legacy is not simply a matter for our personal negotiation. There is a legal reality waiting outside our fragile bubble, an estate accustomed to clarity, to lines of descent and photographs on mantels. The Ashford family has always prided itself on continuity. An unplanned son complicates that. It promises to complicate everything. I fold the solicitor's note away like a paper wound and look at the small sleeping face of Leo. There are going to be battles. There will be strategies and evidence and the cold calculus of wills and bloodlines. For now the house is quiet and the monitors hum in a rhythm that matches my own great faltering attempt to survive. Adrian stands in the doorway as if waiting to be instructed, his hands unclasped, unarmed. When he catches my gaze he gives a small nod, not claiming victory, but committing to attendance. The rest of the world, his mother, the Ashford legacy, the lawyers who will smell opportunity and threat, are not yet in the room, but their shadows hover at the edges of my periphery, and a small, stubborn part of me tightens against the coming storm. I breathe in the sandalwood and the lemon and the laundry detergent, and I let my son's small chest rise and fall on my hand. This is the truth. He exists, and he is mine. He will be protected. He will not be a bargaining chip in some family's ledger unless I let him be. Adrian will learn, or he will find himself a man who cannot call himself mine. When night falls and the house draws around our small bubble, Adrian sits beside me and tells me a story from a quieter time. An anecdote about his father teaching him how to fix a leaking pipe, about a winter when they had to eat boxed dinners because the staff had a strike. The memory strips the gilding from the Ashford name, and, for a tiny, dangerous moment, I see him as a man who has been molded by distance, but not beyond repair. We do not make vows that night. We sign no contracts that will mean anything to an estate or a solicitor. But the small things begin. A promise given in a whisper, a schedule adhered to, the tiny, constant circadian work of parenting. Consent becomes ritual. Permission given and respected. Layers of trust accreted like sediment. And in the middle of that hesitant piece, a notification hums on my phone. A headline from a paper I no longer subscribe to flashes on the screen. Ashford scion seen at private hospital following birth. It is triangulation of interest. The word heir appears somewhere in the blurb, and at once the house seems to hold its breath. The portrait looks down with ancestral patience, and I, Julian Sterling, the Omega who thought he could manage alone, feel, for the first time since labor began, that the work ahead will be more than keeping a fragile heart steady. It will be about keeping Leo safe from the very family that would prefer a neat lineage to the messy truth of love. I close my eyes against the smallness in my hand and the echo of those words. The monitors tick. The house sleeps, but not peacefully. Outside, the world, which has always loved a neat story, is starting to whisper. If you love second chance slow burns, leave a like and subscribe. And then let me tell you what happened next. The phone beneath my palm vibrates like a small, implacable insect. Messages stack into a column of concern, curiosity, and opportunism. A solicitor's terse note requesting a meeting, a socialite gossip account tagging a photograph of the Ashford carriage, a text from Sarah asking if I want the blinds closed. Adrian reads none of it aloud. He stands by the window, hands in his pockets, the way men sometimes stand when they're deciding whether to open a door that will change everything inside. She's already moving, he says, and the word is not an accusation so much as an inventory. Victoria's sent a solicitor. She won't make noise without paperwork. The house breathes around us, a mood made of polished surfaces that have never known poverty and now must learn how to hold an infant. The monitors in the guest suite give off a small, mechanical heartbeat that matches mine when I let it, and I am grateful for the rhythm because it keeps my fear in measure. Victoria Ashford arrives like a storm in a silk suit. Her entrance must have been planned in some boardroom. Men and women rehearse the arc of the head turn, the polite lift of a hand, a smile that looks like a contract. She is not the caricature of a villain. She is elegant, practiced, and infuriatingly calm. When she sees me with Leo in my arms, the trained composure briefly flickers, and something like interest sharpens in her eyes. "Julian," she says, and the name is a blade in a velvet sheath. Her voice carries the authority of an institution. How curious to see him here. Her mind is already cataloging us. The sun, the guest suite, the monitors. Adrian's jaw tightens, and for the first time since the birth I see him do something that resembles anger rather than contrition. It's clean, not theatrical, a man prepared to take steps. Her solicitor, a man with a thin face and a businesslike posture, produces a folder with too much ceremony. Madam Ashford has concerns regarding heirship necessity, he says, the words rolling out like they have been used many times before. To avoid any future ambiguity about estate succession, we require confirmation of paternity as a matter of due diligence. The paperwork is standard. The papers glitter with legalese. My name is there. Adrian's name is there. And in the margins of his mother's politeness, there is a demand. Prove this child belongs to the Ashford line if you want to remain in its light. I don't think this is necessary, Adrian says flatly. His hands are fists at his sides. Leo is my son. Victoria smiles like sympathy. These things are not personal, Adrian. You know how society insists upon clarification, for the estate's protection, for legacy, I finish. Her face owns the pause for a beat too long. You want him as an heir, and you will make a test to confirm a truth you already know because you think law will make you safe? The solicitor sets a lamp on the table, a polite object meant to make us forget what's at stake. Control. He mentions a reputable lab. He mentions chain of custody. He mentions neutrality. Everything is rendered in words meant to soothe the philosopher inside a man who loves certainty. Anything that reduces friction, Victoria says, as if heirship were merely an administrative itch. We can be expedient about it. Adrian glances at me like a man checking whether a bridge has collapsed. If there's a test to be done, we'll do it properly, he replies. But we do it here, through my legal counsel, with the hospital sample in secure custody. No theatrics. There is a pause as I watch both of them measure what victory would mean. Victory to Victoria is the neatness of an heir on a family tree. Victory to Adrian is the same neatness dragged through shame and apology. I have my own ledger. Months of absence, of unanswered messages, of being reduced to surviving. I want to say to Victoria that a child is not a line for a ledger. But I also know there are rules, and sometimes rules become hammers. The test is scheduled with legal witnesses. There are forms to sign. The solicitor's pen glides across the paper like a machine. I sign them because I will not be the one to make things harder for Leo. Adrian signs as well, though his signature is quieter. a different kind of admission. 2 days later, a lab report arrives in a form designed to look definitive. It is stamped and folded, the sort of document that feels like an edict. My hands shake when I open it. The top line says, "Sample completed. Result, exclusion." There is a string of numbers. My stomach drops faster than the blood pressure numbers that once had me in a hospital bed. Adrian takes the paper and he does not let his face rearrange itself into something soft. He reads it once, twice, and the room narrows to the space between us. "This can't be right," he says. "Did you sign the chain of custody forms?" I ask. My voice is thin, but I'm thinking the only way someone can tell a family like the Ashfords that their heir is not theirs is through numbers that can't be contradicted. If his mother has evidence, then the paper will stand. He sets the report down and pushes his chair back with a small, precise movement. "I want the lab logs. I want the technician roster. Also the CCTV records of the point when the sample left the hospital." His voice is clipped and efficient, and suddenly he's back to being a man used to commanding rooms. Victoria watches him, a polite expression like a cat considering a mouse. "This is not necessary," she says. "A result is a result." His patience, the kind he reserves for a scalpel or a boardroom, cracks. "You will not weaponize a child with paperwork," he tells her, quiet and absolute. "Not while I am—" He stops himself. He does not issue the threat because he does not want it to be framed as an abuse of his influence. Instead, he asks for receipts and timestamps and the names of everyone who touched the samples, and the request is entirely lawful. There is a soft reproduction of civility. Victoria's smile tightens. The next days are a blur of carbon copies and calls. Adrian's team combs through logs with the same intensity he once reserved for surgical outcomes. Nothing dismissed until it is verifiably false. The lab is a fortress of official procedures and people who have spent their careers in the steadiness of evidence. On paper, everything is by the book. But on paper, so often the story is not the whole story. What cracks the case is a small thing: an overlooked camera angle. A lab assistant in a tired hoodie catches Adrian's eagle-eyed analyst's attention. On the footage, the courier who picks up the samples the day the test was scheduled arrives with a box labeled for a different facility. There's a shuffle of hands in the frame. Gloved, diligent hands that seem to swap a vial under the guise of explanation. One of the lab technicians, a young man with a permanent crease of fatigue at the brow, spends too long in the corridor that day, and appears on the footage speaking on the phone in a voice that sounds like someone doing a favor. His recorded call later reveals a payment notification. Nothing dramatic, a transfer of money labeled appreciation. It smells to us like a bribe. Adrian sits with me across a small table, the video playing on a laptop like a film we both dread watching. He pauses the footage on freeze frame after freeze frame, his finger tapping the glass. "Look," he says. "Timestamp is wrong. The courier left the lab 40 minutes later than the manifest says. That vial should have been logged. It wasn't. Someone altered the chain," I say, because it makes sense. My anger, slow building, bends toward clarity. Someone wanted that test to be decisive. It doesn't take long for Adrian to trace the money transfers. A shell account, small amounts placed like breadcrumbs, leading to a trust associated with one of Victoria's philanthropic projects. The evidence is a corridor of modest tricks. A paid courier, a tired technician, a misfiled timestamp. Not the stuff of a crime novel, but enough if you know where to look. Confronting Victoria is its own theater. We don't ambush her in a public square. We do it at her threshold, where she has always been certain her doorway keeps the world clean. Adrian walks in with our solicitor, the video file on his device. I follow because fear is never a reason to hide when the thing you're protecting is already in your arms. She stands in the foyer, composed as if a portrait of calm. A few other family members hover at the peripheries, faces arranged in hospitality. Her eyes do not widen. Instead, she smiles in a way that suggests she's used to being mistaken for gentleness. "Victoria," Adrian says, and the name has a new weight. He places the laptop on the hall table and plays the footage. The images are small and grainy, but the timestamps are clear and the voices are unmistakable. She does not look surprised when the evidence plays. Her face moves through a scale, first fascination, then calculation, then a mask so tightly fitted it's hard to read. "Curious," she says finally as the video ends. "There's always room for technological error." "There's no error to be polite about," Adrian replies. "Your courier's manifest doesn't line up. The ledger shows payments to a shell." She laughs, a practiced sound. "And you believe a technician's tiredness is a conspiracy?" "Adrian, we've known each other long enough to know how people make mountains on molehills." His voice is low, but there is something like a roar in it. "You instructed the courier. The transaction traces back to your charitable fund. Explain that." A hush falls. The family members step back from the threshold, their faces a cross between curiosity and self-preservation. She looks at me then, cool and probing. "Do you know," she says slowly, "how messy lineage can become? Heirs create scandal. This was precaution." "Precaution," I repeat, "and it tastes like bile." The solicitor speaks up quietly and with legal calm. He outlines what the footage shows. He lays the trail of payment on the table. He uses words like interference and tampering and unlawful chain of custody alteration. His tone is dispassionate. His facts are not. Victoria's expression thins. "You will not make accusations without proof," she says. "You are playing with a family's reputation." Adrian steps forward. He is not theatrical, but every person in the room knows what the movement means. An alpha marking territory, a man more dangerous when he is quiet. He shows a list of receipts, a ledger printout, the courier's contract. The solicitor notes where procedure was not followed and where payments converged. It's not melodramatic. It is forensic. "Madam," he says, "if these transactions were authorized by you or your office, I request explanation. If not, I will have no choice but to pursue statutory remedies." There is a legal hush then, the kind that removes pretense and leaves only consequence. Victoria's shoulders tighten in a small, human way. "I did not intend for this to become a spectacle," she says. But the words are thin. The family looks at her with a different kind of calculation. She is an asset and a risk. After a week of terse legal maneuvers and private threats, she admits to a misjudged precaution. The phrasing is a classic of people who have lived a long time in the soft corridors of privilege. There is an apology, the kind that maps to the scale of harm in a way she believes absolves her. She offers to withdraw the exclusion report and to publicly recognize Leo as Adrian's heir, conditional on his inclusion in family charity events and appearances. I watch her perform contrition like a pianist hitting practiced notes. I do not forgive on the basis of a softened tone. Adrian, however, is not vindictive. He wants the truth to stand. He wants the weapon she wielded to be turned into nullity. He wants our life to be private and intact, unassailed by signatures that could be used as levers. He is measured in his retribution. He wants public clarification, a legal statement that the test was compromised, and a retraction from her solicitor. In public, Victoria is graceful about the withdrawal. She speaks of family and lessons learned with a mincing cadence. She smiles for photographs 2 weeks later with Leo in her arms like a practiced doting relative. The cameras are there, grateful for her redemption arc. When I see the image later, it makes something like coldness crawl up my spine. Image management is a practiced thing for families like hers. They sign concessions and then spin them into goodwill. I would be lying if I said the exposure doesn't change the physics of our relationship. It is a wound, but not the kind that stays raw. The truth, once out, makes a space for rebuilding that is less about performance and more about actual decisions. Adrian and I are forced to talk not merely about emotions, but about legalities, childcare plans, and realistic ways to protect the child from future intrusions. We draw up a formal custody agreement. I am not infantilized in the drafting. Adrian insists on my agency. The legal drafter includes clear language, mutual consultation on major decisions, joint guardianship, a clause that restricts family interference in daycare or naming. There is also a clause that requires both parties to meet and confer prior to any public photo releases of Leo to family press. Adrian offers even more than I'm willing to accept. He offers to relinquish certain claims if I choose to move elsewhere. But I make it clear in the meeting that my place is here, that acceptance is not a surrender. He keeps his end of the bargain in visible ways. He installs a secure entry code system on the Ashford house doors that he cannot override. Both our names are on the baby's birth certificate in a format that makes custody clearer in the eyes of the law. When Victoria later oversteps, a lunch invitation that feels like a ploy, Adrian refuses to permit it until he has my permission. He enforces boundaries that once he would have allowed to be crossed. We create rituals for safety. Mrs. Gable becomes our quiet ally. She blocks intrusive calls with a practiced hand and tells Victoria, politely but firmly, that mornings are for family only. When she delivers baby clothes or a casserole, she leaves them on the porch with notes that feel almost maternal. Sarah texts me at 3 in the morning to say Leo has been unusually fussy and advises a feeding schedule. Adrian answers and follows through. The small mechanics of daily life. Who takes Leo for his first immunization? Who will be responsible for night feedings when he has a fever? Become contracts of care rather than items to be wielded like trump cards. There are storms of emotion in between acts of administration. I will not pretend I am healed when we sign the custody document. Healing is a longer arc. Some nights I press my face into the crook of Leo's neck and let the rhythm of his breathing lull me while I cry quietly at the injustice of what I once was given. Some nights I wake to the memory of the man who left, and I find Adrian on the couch with a thermos and a book, unread. He will not speak of the past unless I ask, and even then his apologies are integrated with action. Courtship after trauma is careful and frictioned. Adrian recognizes that presence alone does not equate to love regained. To him, the practical translates into symbolic acts. But he is mindful of my terms. He does not demand ceremonies. He asks permission for tokens. He asks if certain measures feel like pressure. He learns the difference between being a protector and being a jailer. He brings me the small things at first. A notebook for my lists, because he remembers how I coped with the smallest details when I was alone. A patchwork of songs compiled on a playlist for when nights are long. A GPS token, which makes me bristle when he mentions it. The one he proposes as an emergency locator, to be used only with explicit consent. I say no to the GPS token. I will not be tracked. He reacts to my refusal with surprise but not with spite. Later, after we negotiate boundaries with our solicitor, we decide the GPS device can be an emergency-only device tied to my approval. I keep the key to its activation. This moment, ridiculous to some, becomes a test of negotiation between us. He offers, I accept on my terms. He makes bigger gestures too. Things that cannot be confused with business. One evening, when the house is asleep and the monitors tick in their soft chorus, Adrian brings me a slim box. Inside is a simple band, not the heavy Ashford signet, but a ring shaped without opulence. He does not kneel. He sits beside my bed, vulnerable and brisk. I want to promise you, he says. Not the way my family promises because they expect, but a promise I intend to keep. I look at the ring, and the old reflexes flare. Promises have been broken on both sides. But the paper trail of his actions is visible. The logs he asked for. The technology he instituted. The way his staff now greet me with a different respect. There is something in him that has begun to croon the same tune as me. That love must be proven in ordinary things. I will not take your consent, he adds. I will earn it daily. The ring goes on my finger because I choose it. It is not a surrender to the Ashford line, but a personal acceptance of a man who has shown he might be better than he once was. The ring is a seal of negotiation, a physical acknowledgement that we are attempting to rebuild something honest. The next step, the rebonding, requires the most care. In our world, the bond is not merely symbolic, it is physiological and intimate, and each step toward it must be consented to and medically supervised. Dr. Eris explains the risks and the benefits. In the Omegaverse framework we use, he says, speaking clinically and always careful to clarify fictionalized elements, bonding can heighten empathetic resonance and reduce stress markers for an omega in recovery. But it's not a cure. Its effects are as much psychological as physiological. We'll monitor cardiac response, catecholamine levels, and emotional stability. Consent must be documented. Aftercare will include supervised adaptation sessions. We choose a day for the procedure, months after the birth. The house has grown used to the rhythms of an infant, the soft wars of night feedings, the bedtime stories, the slow mouthing over a chipped wooden train. We arrange for a controlled environment in a private wing of the mansion, Dr. Eris in attendance, a small team of nurses who know us, and myself fully aware and sober. Adrian sits opposite me, palms open and empty in a way that signals voluntary surrender. Before anything happens, we make rules. I list the moments that would make me stop and ask for them to be honored. He agrees to each clause. If I say stop, it is stop. If I need to withdraw consent, it will be immediate without demand for explanation. He places his hand over mine and says, "I won't take you without you." The bond process in our lore involves a ritual that can be intimate, a deliberate, consensual bite, the mark of a mutual acceptance that binds scent and heartbeat. It is not an act of ownership in the way the Ashfords once thought of lineage. It is a mutualing, an exchange. We undertake it as adults, choosing a shared experiment to foster connection. Dr. Eris monitors my EKG. Mrs. Gable sits nearby with a look that is prayer and practicality in the same face. When it happens, it is less cinematic than rumor. Adrian leans forward, his face an anatomy of concentration and tenderness. He asks quietly, "Are you sure?" "I am." My voice is steady as I say yes. He bites, carefully, with consent and reverence, a small, shallow bite along the underside of my wrist, where the scent glands are subtle. There is no sexual display, only a physical exchange, the faint release of pheromone, the tremor of nerves. The sensation is immediate, a wash of warmth that makes me lightheaded, like the feeling of lying down after sprinting. It feels ancient and private. After, everything is loud. Emotions crash against each other in a messy way: relief, fear, pleasure, panic. Dr. Eris checks my vitals, and for a terrifying moment my heart flutters in a way that sends them scurrying. He calms me with words and hands. Adrian does not leave my side. He holds me, and for the first time in months, there is a physical meeting between our heartbeats, a metronome that matches our breaths. The early hours after the bonding are complicated. We fall into a strange intimacy that demands immediate aftercare. Sleeping in the same room but with measured intervals, sessions with a counselor to process the cascade of feeling, and a plan for when attraction and the memory of abandonment collide. It is messy and humane. We argue, and we reconcile, and both acts feel vital, like the muscles in a joint learning to hold weight again. Over months, the bond settles into something less volatile. We learn how to live without the constant ache of uncertainty. Adrian's punctuality becomes tenderness. He arrives with Leo's favorite book in the morning, or a particular toothbrush that makes us both laugh. I train myself to trust his patterns, but he is not allowed unearned privileges. He proves his change in ways that are visible and invisible. The signatures, the small mundane tasks, the way he picks up a crying baby without theatricality. The Ashford family adjusts in the ways families do when forced to incorporate a new variable. There are cold dinners and guarded compliments. Some relatives accept Leo with warmth. Others watch like guardians of a ledger. Victoria, after the public retraction and her carefully worded apology, begins to behave like a careful observer. There are small attempts at reconciliation on her part. Invitations that come with teeth. Adrian refuses them when I do not feel ready. He presses for limited contact only when I consent. Time passes with the rhythm of feedings, diaper changes, doctor's visits, a first tooth, a first step. The house, once a stage for lineage performance, softens into a home. The monitors gather dust as we grow used to nights that are less punctured by alarm. Leo becomes a creature of our making. He prefers the smell of lemon-scented detergent when I hold him, and he curls into Adrian's shoulder with the same fierce, immediate trust babies have for a steady hand. There is an argument one winter evening that feels sharp enough to split concrete. I find a photograph in an Ashford album, one of those portrait sittings where families line up like chess pieces. And there's a space where a small hand might have been. My loneliness curls around that absence and colors it black. I bring it to Adrian, voice thin with something like accusation. He is tired, bone-tired, but he meets me at the hallway where the portrait hangs. "You think I don't see what was missing?" he asks. His hands are empty, but his eyes are relentless. "You think I don't have nightmares about what's behind that smile my mother taught me? I left because I didn't want to be the man who ruined a future. I've lived with what that choice cost. I don't expect gratitude, I want to be better because you deserve better. It is not melodrama. It is a man who will not flinch from responsibility. I respond with a sarcasm that is also a question. Will you still leave when something harder comes along? Will you still choose status? He takes my hands. I chose the wrong thing before, he says simply. I won't make that choice again. But I also know that words are not enough for you, so I'll keep showing up. Later, the symbolic rupture with our past comes in a small, private ceremony. Adrian invites me to his study where the divorce paperwork waits like a relic of something unfinished. He takes the stack of paper and, with a gesture that feels more ritual than grandstanding, burns them in a contained bowl. The smoke is thin, and the ash is insignificant. But the act is not for show. It is for us. A declaration, not that the past is erased, but that we will not let those papers define the future. After the ceremony, an even more public step follows. Adrian plans a quiet dinner on the house's roof, an intimate affair with fairy lights and a small band. I arrive nervous and watch him in his element. Composed, vulnerable, a man who has learned the contours of humility. He speaks not of legacy but of choice. He tells me that he is choosing not his family's idea of him, but the messy, harder version that loves me and Leo. He asks me to marry him again. Only this time, without the Ashford fanfare, without the expectations, but with the promise of accountability. I say yes because I want to. I want to because his actions and our months together have shown me a man who can be present. We celebrate in a small circle. Mrs. Gable with tears she pretends to hide, Sarah with a sly grin, Dr. Eris with a respectful nod. The cameras wait for nothing this time. The choice is ours. Years pass, and the domestic life we stitch together is not perfect, but it is ours. Leo grows into a small person with my eyes and Adrian's stubborn chin. The public's curiosity cools. Truth is not as interesting as scandal. The Ashford name remains powerful, but it is less able to manipulate the course of our days. Victoria visits sometimes with different manners, softer in ways that feel purchased. The family adjusts like tides, finding a new coastline. One night, when Leo is 3 and has learned to climb onto our bed and declare that he can fly with a toddler's solemnity, I find myself sitting in the nursery long after he sleeps. The house is quiet in a way that feels like completion. A small box of baby clothes sits in a basket. The idea of a second child had been a soft thought that hovered for months and grew into something steadier. Adrian joins me with 2 mugs of tea. He hands me one and then slips his hand into mine. It is a small ritual. I have been thinking, he says after a while, about promises and what they look like when you live them. I breathe in the sandalwood that follows him like a shadow, and I feel the warmth spread not just across my skin, but through the places that once were hollowed by absence. Me too, I say, and I mean all of the small things. Nights where he picked up Leo when I could not. The fights we've had about privacy and the way he kept his word. The legal scaffolding he helped construct so that my son could be protected. He looks at me with a seriousness that is not theatrical. Would you consider giving him a sibling? He asks. Not because the family expects, but because I want more of what we have. Because he deserves a brother or sister who grows up around this. Not an image of my family's idea of lineage. I laugh, incredulous and delighted. Are you asking for another negotiation? In part, he smiles. And in part, yes. Will you try with me? There is a tenderness in the ask that is not about legacy or brood-making. It is about expansion. He wants to make our small family larger by choice, not by obligation. He reaches into his pocket and pulls out a simple band, not flashy, not Ashford, but given with an openness. Will you marry me properly? He asks, the question small and huge at once. Will you let me choose you in public this time, and not just behind closed doors? I look at him, and then at Leo asleep in the other room. The small face arranged like proof that love, when chosen, can grow. Yes, I say, and there is no smallness in my voice. The answer is an agreement across years, an embodied decision. Months later, I feel the quick, insistent flicker inside me like a secret drum. It is early and delicate and raw with possibility. I sit at the kitchen island while Leo eats a scrambled egg and watches a worm of butter melt. Adrian is opposite me, his expression pried open into something like gentle astonishment when I fold my hand into his and tell him. He doesn't reach for storm or for the heft of his family's opinion. He reaches for the kettle and pours us both a cup of tea with a careful hand, as if steadiness is now his second nature. We tell no one at first, choosing to savor the private geometry of the news. When we do tell the family, we do it on our terms. A small dinner with only those we trust. Victoria is there, tentative, proffered apologies kept like polished silver. She smiles like a woman who thinks she can make amends with presents. I watch her and think of the courier on grainy footage, the ledger that proved interference, and I feel the edges of triumph. Not the vengeance of one who has been wronged, but the solid rightness of a life kept safe. Our second pregnancy is not a tidy arc. There are complications, minor in the grander bundle of possible futures, that require extra monitoring, and Dr. Eris is utterly without artifice. He schedules more visits, more scans, and I learn to accept certainty as something you build, rather than something you inherit. He explains the physiological dynamics with a measured tone, labeling some explanations as the accepted fiction we use in our world for the sake of understanding. It does not feel like a diminution of the experience. It feels like an acknowledgement that some parts resist tidy description. On the morning I tell Adrian properly, he stands in the nursery holding Leo and breathes in my lemon scent like a benediction. The house watches us with a caution that has learned to be kind. He lifts me into an embrace that smells of sandalwood and faint coffee, and when he speaks it is soft. Family by choice, he says. This time, we choose everything about it. I rest my hand on my belly and feel the flutter of something new and expectant. And I understand that the life we've created is not the tidy plan the Ashford line would have designed in their stairwells. It is messy and courageous and stubbornly ours. It has been bought with apologies and legal documents and 1,000 small acts. But it was always, at the base, a choice. The final image that holds for me is not one of a mansion polished to reflection, nor a matriarch's smile. It is Leo holding my hand in a playground while Adrian waits at the bench, the three of us casting a small shadow shaped like ordinary life. My heart has grown not only in the literal ways that worried the early doctors, but in the capacity to forgive without forgetting. To set boundaries and also be present. The Ashford family still exists, of course, with its expectations and its portraits. But when Victoria asks me later, in an unguarded moment, if we will let Leo sit on a legacy chair at the Foundation's gala, I look at my son, at the small, immediate person he is, and I say no. Legacy needs to be redefined. He will inherit love, not entitlement. There are no sweeping proclamations at the end of our story. There is only the sound of a monitor that has become unnecessary but sits in a drawer like a relic, the smell of sandalwood that will forever follow Adrian, the lemon and rain that are my scent, a ring on my finger that represents a promise of being shown again and again how to stay. And there is Leo, who will one day ask awkward questions about lineage and love, and we will answer him with the truth that matters, that he was not a bargaining chip, that he was never a ledger entry, that he was chosen and protected. If this story moved you, drop a heart and subscribe for more.